This is a day of celebration. Rosh Chodesh Adar, and as I noted in introducing the service that I have found indeed a source of joy, I quoted a rabbinic expression, Shenichnas Adar Marbin et Simcha. When the month of Adar enters, joy increases. Now, you know, it's not all smooth sailing in the month of Adar. For it is in the month of Adar that we also read in Megillat Esther the story of Purim, of great dangers. It's frankly because those great dangers were overcome that on Purim we celebrate that Haman is no longer a threat. And so even though at the beginning of the month there is uncertainty, nonetheless, we begin to celebrate because of our faith, our confidence. Well, frankly, we know how the story ends. We know it's going to end well. And so even at the beginning of Adar, we begin to celebrate. Our parsha this week is Parsha Mishpatim. Elie Mishpatim, and these are the laws that follow immediately after the giving of the Ten Commandments, which was last Shabbat. In this week's Parsha, there is a weave, a mix of all kinds of laws. How to deal with a slave, how to deal with coming to God in the holidays, how to deal with a stranger, and the responsibilities to community. All intertwined. For one of the messages of this week's reading is that to live a full life is to fully integrate oneself in one's religious life with what we call mitzvot ben Adam lamakom, mitzvot, commandments between an individual and the place, God, mitzvot ben Adam lechavero, and those commandments between an individual and another. Those are intertwined. You know, in the Ten Commandments and the two plaques, it seemed as if the first plaque was largely about our relationship with God, and the second, beginning with thou shalt not murder to thou shalt not covet, are about how we relate to others. But the rabbis say that they are indeed intertwined. Ve'elah hamishpatim, and these are the laws. Rashi, the great commentator of France, 1040 to 1105, said that this parsha begins with the word and, because the Ten Commandments require an explanation. That the 10 great sayings, ha'eser hadibrot, in order to live those sayings, needed specifics of application. And in doing so, even those specifics of application, they too will need specifics to understand context. So first, this idea of the need for specifics for big ideas. Years ago, I went to a conference at the Disney Center, Anaheim Convention Hall. It was largely for business people in sales. But I went because I saw it advertised in the Orange County Register with big names. Larry King was presenting. Zig Ziglar, the famous motivational speaker, I'll meet you at the top. And so to see these well-known personalities, I too paid the money, unlike most in the office who had been paid for in order to become better salespeople. I went to become a better speaker. And to watch them on their stage in front of thousands in the convention center was truly to see the art of how do you keep a crowd engaged. And one of the things they did to keep the crowd engaged is they would have raffles periodically. And if your ticket matched, you would get books. You see, when a presenter got up and presented for an hour how to become a better salesperson, taught these big ideas that were very motivating, the books in the hallway, which cost a lot more money than the price of admission, were the specifics of how to take apart that big idea and implement it step by step. Now, I smiled to myself skeptically that this was all an attempt to get people to buy the books, and that the whole setup with tickets that weren't so expensive was simply a way to sell something that cost a lot more. And when I finished the day, there were so many ideas for me to percolate on. I felt so motivated to be more motivated. But what I found is that the big ideas quickly faded without the quality of knowing how to implement them. And so that's the teaching of Yitro, the Parsha of drama, the sound and light show, the memorable experience that we still tell about when we as a people stood at Mount Sinai and heard God's voice proclaiming the 10 Commandments. But for those commandments to become a way of life, they needed laws, Mishpatim, a clarity of the details of expectation of how to live out a relationship with God, a relationship with other people. And then there's one more key notion, and that is even when you have the laws, it doesn't mean you know necessarily, one, what the laws mean, and two, how to apply them. So let me give you one of the examples of Mishpatim that I wrote about last week in introducing one of my Psalms. It says, if two men are fighting and one of them hits a pregnant woman and she has a miscarriage, but there is no ason, no tragedy, then it shall be paying of damages to her husband. But, the next verse, if there is a tragedy, then it shall be life for life. Now that's an example of how law can often be ambiguous. The missing piece in that law from Exodus is tragedy to whom? She's had a miscarriage. The child that she was carrying has emerged. But there's only the paying of civil damages. Is the tragedy, the ason, the harm to the mother? No other damage to the mother other than, if you will, a miscarriage that led to the fetus dying? Or there's no other damage to the mother, hence compensation for the fetus in damages only. Now here's an example where the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition, beginning with Augustine, split. In reading that ellipsis, that gap in that law in this morning's Torah reading, the rabbis understood it as if there is no other harm to the mother other than the loss of her child, which of course is significant. And I'm using the word child, but as the rabbis understood it, human life didn't begin until birth. So if there was damage to the woman, but she survived, then her harm was compensated with money, which is to say in the next verse, but if a tragedy occurred, then life for life. If the mother died, that's the ellipse, the gap being filled in by our sages, then the woman, the mother's life, warrants the death penalty to the assailant. Because there is this gap, there's a need to explain. In beginning with Augustine, there was a question of when is there ensoulment. And there it was said with conception. And so or maybe even because of the Septuagint, the Greek translation of this verse, there it was understood, filling in the pronouns, that if a tragedy occurs to the fetus, then life for life, rather than for the mother. So, 10 Commandments, sound and light show, drama, those are the principles, the big ideas that requires the Elie Mishpatim. Those big ideas require specific laws. But even those specific laws, they require the details of filling in sometimes ambiguity. That is the nature of law. And then last, applying law, that too creates ambiguity. Because all law requires context. So regarding that law I just cited, if two men are fighting and he hit a pregnant woman, well, what's the context of hitting the pregnant woman? Did she wrongfully get involved in the fight? Was she in some level culpable? Was there intention to harm her? Or was it simply a missed punch that struck somebody standing by? Was it foreseeable that that missed punch could have endangered somebody else, and that the punching was, if you will, grossly inappropriate? So there, context matters. I was walking to synagogue this morning, and I saw two people going through a big garbage bin in front of a house. And they were seeming, it was one of these big rental garbage cans, and it was full with stuff, the kind I used to dive into to retrieve things in my New York days. I have some remarkable souvenirs from garbage diving in my youth. And as I walked by, I wondered, it was early in the morning, are they sifting through because they took something out because they are aware and they're just scavengering? And that was my initial inclination. And I actually was watching them to see what they were going to find. And again, because I've had memories of finding good things, wondering maybe I should look. But when they finished taking something out, they turned and they walked into their garage. It was clear it was their garbage they were looking through. But you see, we're naturally wired to, based on our own experiences in part, to label quickly what we're seeing. To do so is important. We got to make quick judgments in life, but often we can make false assumptions. We can see somebody staggering down the street and think they're drunk, but indeed they have a balance problem. It's always about taking time to look at a specific situation, lest we misjudge. And for that regard, in our Torah reading, there is another verse, and that is regarding judges. V'shochad lo tikach, and a bribe you shall not take, shezeh misalef et einei pikchim, for it blinds the eyes of the gifted. And that law in Parshat Mishpatim will be repeated in Parshat Shoftim, the Parsha in Deuteronomy that deals with judges. And there it will say that it will blind the eyes even of the wise and even of the righteous. All of us, in looking at the world around us, need to know what is before us and to judge the world and to make decisions with care. To know that, to pull this together. To know that there are principles like the Ten Commandments, values that are enduring, that are the lens, those values of integrity, of knowing that there is a right and a wrong, when there is the patience of clarity, of examination, that even the law can be ambiguous, leading to dramatically different understandings of something as basic as when is life, to knowing and applying a law that one must not prejudge, that one must look at the details for context, because context matters, and that one must be aware of one's own biases, based in part even of unconscious needs. This Shabbat, normally, we would have two Torahs. We would have Mishpatim, which I've just addressed, and we would have a second in honor of Adar. And likewise, this morning our Haftorah would be in honor of Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is a time of rejoicing, even when it's not Rosh Chodesh Adar. Rosh Chodesh is a new moon, a sliver of the moon tonight, with the sense for the rabbis that we all have joy, knowing that there will be renewal as a new month begins. Ribono Shalom, Master of the universe, ve'ela hamishpatim, and these are the laws. The laws that we have are necessary to know how to live our lives. They emerge from big principles, dramatic moments that are there to guide us. And our laws are there to be used with awareness of the context of how they're applied. As we begin the new month of Adar, may we know that there may be bumps ahead, and yet we go forward with faith that God's care is present and Adar will lead to rejoicing. Amen.